Welcome back, everyone. Today we have good news for you, which isn't always the case, but is the type of news that we like to bring you. So as when I'm recording this video, less than 24 hours ago, President Trump issued an executive order pertaining to the ATF as well as the Second Amendment. Many of you guys may have seen it if you follow me on socials, but what we're going to do today is walk through what the executive order actually says. And then after that, some of the things that very well could be impacted and or the restrictions that have been imposed on American citizens that can be reversed. And then sort of beyond that, almost like a wish list that probably could be done if we push hard enough, but isn't quite as easy as some of the things that we're gonna go over first, because the executive order, there's some things that are very easily going to happen. And we'll walk you through all that. But before we do that, let's get into the actual executive order itself. It says Section 1 purpose. The Second Amendment is an indispensable safeguard of security and liberty. That is absolutely true. It has preserved the right of the American people to protect ourselves, our families, and our freedom since the founding of this great nation. Because it is fundamental to maintaining all other rights held by Americans, the right to keep and bear arms must not be infringed. So that is something that we're going to reference a little bit later on in the video. Again, we'll point out some specific dates and things that happen. However, that is also part of the executive order, which is important to understanding really how far this can go if some people are aggressive enough, and hopefully they will be. So, plan of action. Within 30 days of the date of this order, the Attorney General shall examine all orders, regulation, guidance, plans, international agreements, and other actions of executive departments and agencies to assess any ongoing infringements of the Second Amendment rights on our citizens and present a proposed plan of action to the President through the Domestic Policy Advisor to protect the Second Amendment rights of all Americans. So once again, he says any infringements on Second Amendment rights. So that is a broad definition. As we know, pretty much every single gun law ever written, at least at the federal level, is an infringement on your Second Amendment rights. The state level, probably those too. However, that's a little bit of a different discussion for another video, but getting down to it, he says, all presidential and agencies' actions from January 2021 through January 2025 that purport to promote safety but may have impinged on the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens, rules promulgated by the Department of Justice, including by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives from January 21st through January 2025 pertaining to firearms and or federal firearms licensees, agencies' plans, orders, actions regarding the so-called enhanced regulatory enforcement policy pertaining to firearms and or federal firearms licensee, reports and related documents issued by the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention, the positions taken by the United States in any and all ongoing potential Second Amendment litigation that affects or could affect the ability of Americans to exercise their Second Amendment rights, agencies' classification of firearms and ammunition, the processing of applications to make, manufacture, transfer, or export firearms. Then he goes on to give a 30-day timeline like he mentioned in the beginning. And so we're going to walk through that. What does all that mean? Well, again, the reports issued by the White House's Office of Gun Violence Prevention, we have a full video on that. We did that, I believe, 2 weeks ago when President Trump eliminated it. That was a very expansive organization that had up to 50 employees at the federal level. However, just like what you see with USAID, what they ended up doing was networking with a bunch of different NGOs and other subcontract agencies at the state level to infringe on everyone's rights at a scale that would not have been possible if the federal government and the president was not enabling it. That was, of course, a product of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which a lot of Republicans did unfortunately vote for. Then he goes on to say the positions taken by the United States in any and all ongoing potential litigation. So that's huge. So as I mentioned in that video as well, there are a ton of different cases right now that prior to January 20th of this year, the Merrick Garland Department of Justice was appealing and fighting in court, federal court and state court, to preserve. So different things that we're going to talk about here, but things like what is a short barrel rifle versus what is a braced pistol, frames and receivers, 80% firearms, FRTs, force reset triggers, and many other things that the ATF was arguing in court, and the Department of Justice, I should say, were things that should be prohibited. Right now, because the Department of Justice is run by Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, all of those things, if essentially the right calls are made in each of those court cases, will and should go our way. And the president, of course, is directing her to come up with a plan within the next 30 days in terms of how to do that, which is a huge win on many different fronts. Additionally, it goes on to the agency's classifications of firearms and ammunition, which is exactly what I just talked about. The thing about ammunition that's interesting there is some of the import restrictions that happened under the President Biden administration absolutely can be reversed. We did a video on that before in terms of Form 6 importation. If you search my channel, you guys will find it. But essentially what the Biden administration did was change the Form 6 approval process. And the Form 6, for people who have normal jobs, which of course is most of you, is the form that an importer has to fill out and get approved by the Department of Justice and sometimes the Department of State, depending on what it is, in order to import ammunition from various countries. So essentially, Biden put a limit on it from the time he said it should be restricted for 18 months, and then that period has gone into effect. So now most Form 6 are not getting approved for importation of ammunition because of the classifications he put on it. That could immediately be reversed. That could be reversed today and hopefully within 30 days. Now, I know U.S. manufacturers of ammo may not be a huge fan of that. However, U.S. customers and consumers of ammunition should be a big fan of that because, of course, that more competition, more different sources coming in makes it cheaper in the end for all of us to enjoy our Second Amendment liberties and train accordingly. And the last one here, the processing of applications to make, manufacture, transfer, or export firearms. That actually has a few different meanings depending on who you are and who you're reading that. The big ones are going to be, for most people watching this video, it's going to be Form 1 applications as well as Form 4. So those are applications for suppressors as well as short barrel rifles, short barrel shotguns, and other NFA, National Firearms Act items. What he's saying there is how to speed those up. Those should be virtually instantly. Like I mentioned in that gun violence prevention video, NFA transfer times, there's no law that says they have to take a certain amount of time. They can be just as quick as a 4473, i.e. the gun form that you fill out when you go to a gun shop, which we'll talk about here in a second. That will be coming up as well. But those NFA forms could be just as fast. There's no reason they can't be. So certainly maybe that's something the Trump administration is looking into here. With that good news aside, there is some restrictions in terms of what this can actually happen based on U.S. law. However, some of that is a gray area, which we will get into. So the big ones are going to be the National Firearms Act, which passed in 1934. What that did was create items that are restricted classes of items, machine guns, as well as short barrel rifles, short barrel shotguns, any other weapon, AOWs, suppressors, things like that. And then we have the Gun Control Act of 1968. That did a number of things. One of the big ones, of course, was creating a mandatory system where guns had to be serialized and then tracked when they were sold. Continuing on was the 1986 law, which was the Firearms Protection Act. And that did a number of different things, including prohibit the manufacture of new production machine guns, as well as a couple other things that we're going to talk about here in just a second. But I point to those laws to point out that some of these things can't just easily be done by executive order. However, some of them absolutely can. So those are the things that are really restricting us at the macro level. Now, getting into the focus period that he was mentioning between January of 2021 to January of 2025, just a list of some things I came up with that could easily be reversed. The ammunition that we already talked about. Pistol braces. So right here on this particular firearm here, we have a braced pistol. And there was a period of about a year to a year and a half, depending on where you lived and what organization you may or may not be a member of. That right there would be a felony. So possessing it without having your approved ATF form. That is a very easy thing to fix. It can just be done either by not challenging the current court cases and or issuing a rule at the Department of Justice level, if you will, stating that they are good to go. Braced pistols are not a violation of the National Firearms Act. That could be a policy decision by the president. Additionally, it's going to be forced reset triggers. Again, prior to the Biden administration, forced reset triggers were not an issue. And for those that don't know, forced reset trigger, all it does is when you pull a trigger on a given firearm, they make them for a number of different firearms. The item itself forces your finger forward, forcing the trigger to reset so that way it can be fired again. The ATF and the Department of Justice under the previous administration tried to make the claim that those were machine guns under law. They actually sent federal agents with guns and body armor to kick the doors in of companies that were selling them and manufacturing them and forcibly seize those items. Just a few months ago, as of when we're recording this now, the Department of Justice was actually forced by a judge, a federal appellate court judge, to actually give those items back, to find the people that they stole them from and to return their property. So that process was already underway. Again, it can be easily cemented in law that FRTs are fully legal and restricted in absolutely no way. President Trump spoke to this very specifically in his executive order, but the Biden administration put in policy what they called a zero tolerance policy for federal firearms licensees, meaning that anything, including like a clerical error. So, for example, if you go to purchase a firearm at your local gun dealer and you live at 123 Smith Boulevard, and that's what it says on your ID, and for whatever reason you put 321 Smith Boulevard, let's say, on your firearms background check, the 4473, which we will talk about again here in a second. If you transpose those numbers and the FFL didn't catch that error based on your driver's license, they could have their license revoked and in many cases be criminally charged. So that was never the case until the Biden administration. Typically when those types of errors were caught, which are clerical errors, what would happen previously is the ATF would essentially, the agent that was there to inspect it, would say, hey, you missed this, you might want to check on this, institute a policy or a procedure so that way you have redundant checks in your system as a gun dealer and you're good to go, right? So there was essentially some coaching that would happen and professional courtesy that would happen. However, under the Biden administration, that wasn't the case. And the revocation of federal firearms licensees was at an all-time high under the Biden administration. The Democrats like to talk about food deserts. And of course, what that means and what they mean by that is there's an area where there's not healthy food sold for like a 5-mile radius or something like that. Well, these FFL zero tolerance policies, they were going into certain areas because certain areas have more violations than others. That's just kind of the way it works in reality. They were going to certain areas and revoking the FFLs in that area, creating a legally purchased firearm desert, that's my term, where you can't go to a gun dealer for more than 50 miles, 60 miles in some cases, and people were unable to purchase firearms legally, which of course was the denial of their Second Amendment rights. So that's what it was creating, and it was also causing a lot of good people who were just small business owners to go out of business and lose their livelihoods, which that alone is un-American in itself. So another thing that can be done, he mentioned this, was the background checks. So the Biden administration put in a policy of enhanced background checks under the Office of Gun Violence Prevention that they were funding. Now, President Trump has removed that office and all authorities underneath it. However, codifying that in U.S. law or U.S. rulings, if you will, depending on how this is actually done at the Department of Justice, would certainly be a good thing. It would make it just a much more permanent thing rather than eliminating the funding source of it, which President Trump has already done. Another thing that the last administration did during that period of 2021 to 25 is that they redefined what an import kit was. So this is kind of a esoteric one. However, many of you out there have probably been impacted by this, and I certainly know that many of you have watched my videos of people who are currently in prison because they have been impacted by this. So the way kits have been required to be demilled or demilitarized to be imported. So let's just give you an example that's really simple and most people can understand. So if there was, let's say, a World War II PPSH machine guns, the one that's really iconic and you see it in a lot of the Soviet imagery, the way that traditionally had to come into the country was a single cut on the receiver, and then the rest of the parts could come in. Over time, that was changed to a single cut on the receiver as well as the barrel, and then a single cut on the receiver and or trunnion and barrel, and then under the last administration was 3 cuts on the receiver as well as some additional cuts, and the cuts had to be a certain way and a certain measurement at a certain temperature depending on what the item was, and all of that was opinion. And what that did was it made it much harder to import items that could be built in the United States into working firearms. Additionally, what it did was it created a lot of people who already owned items that were imported under the previous rules, not laws, under the previous rules. It made them targets of the Department of Justice. Many of them were gone after and criminally prosecuted. The most probably famous one of all of those is Tate. You guys may have seen that video I did on him. Adamayak, he was a E6 in the Navy who had some kits at his house and he was selling them, trading them back and forth to various other enthusiasts in the area because he was trying to create a museum in Virginia, and the ATF has prosecuted him, and he is now currently, right now, as of when we're making this video, he is serving a 20-year prison sentence because he had the wrong kind of kit. He had the kind of kit the ATF didn't like during 2021 to 2025, but when it was actually imported, was perfectly legal at that time. So that was the kind of thing that the last administration has been doing, and it's wholly unjust, if you will. Additionally, the frame and receiver rule. So what the ATF tried to do was redefine what a frame and receiver is. So traditionally, let's say on a Glock, the actual area that you grip, that would be considered the frame, and it would require a serial number on it, and that would be considered the firearm there. So the ATF tried to define certain things like pieces of polymer that you could convert at home with certain types of different steps and different materials and buy extra parts to assemble into your own firearm at home. And I should mention, for people who are new here, since the inception of the United States of America, it has always been legal to make your own firearms as long as you don't sell or transfer them. So it's never been against the law. And what the ATF was trying to do was reclassify pieces of plastic, pieces of aluminum into frames and receivers. And a lot of people got into legal trouble for that. Of course, one of the more famous ones was going to be Dexter in New York. He was arrested and he is currently on trial for having an illegal frame or receiver. That was a rule that came out that has been thrown out at the appellate level, and right now, as long as the Attorney General doesn't challenge it, that will go away. However, again, there are businesses that were put out of business because of these laws, and again, there's at least one person right now who is still facing felony charges because of these laws. Now, additionally, one thing I want to point out here is the frame and receiver itself. So the actual frame and receiver law, we should be rolling it in here on your screen. There have been several cases that have come up over the last, I don't know, I would say 10 years specifically, but the most famous one was in 2019, and it happened in California because California has specific frame and receiver laws. However, it was a federal gun charge. And what I'm getting at here is that the many common firearms today, their actual, the way the ATF is classifying them, don't actually work as frame or receivers. The most famous one and the most common one, of course, is going to be the AR-15. There was a case in 2019, the one I'm referring to in California, where a gentleman was creating 80% receivers, and the ATF was claiming that they were AR-15 lower receivers, when that's debatable, and that's a video for another day. However, the ATF, when it was challenged in court, wouldn't say that the AR-15 receiver, just the standard one, the normal AR-15 receiver that we all know, was actually a receiver, simply because it doesn't meet the definition of frame or receiver. So they actually dropped the charges in that case. The Department of Justice did. Let that man go free, which he certainly should be free anyway, but they let him go free because they didn't want to have to prove that an AR-15 lower receiver was a lower receiver under the law as receivers are defined, if that makes sense. There was another case in 2016 in North Carolina that was essentially identical to that, and I say all that to say that under these rules that or the order that President Trump just gave, he could very easily change the Department of Justice's policy on what a receiver is in terms of an actual firearm, and not include things like that. Like, you don't have to include the AR-15 receiver because it doesn't fit the definition. Some guns like this also are a little bit gray in terms of fitting the definition because they don't control the same fire control unit like you would on an AR-15, but the AR-15 doesn't have the firing pin and bolt assembly in the receiver, whereas this does. So there's a little bit of a gray area back and forth, and there's a lot of firearms that are classified as firearms in America that don't actually meet the definition, the federal definition under law of what a receiver is. So taking that definition and enforcing it strictly would be a huge win, because it would create a ton of firearms that could be transferred without any type of headache in America, and that would be a huge win. Is that likely to happen in the next 30 days? Probably not, but it is something worth looking into for the Department of Justice under this administration if the president actually wants to reinstate and restore the Second Amendment rights of the American citizens, as he said in his executive order. Before moving on to the 4473, which I'm sure a lot of you guys want to hear me attack, one thing to note is that a lot of the state laws and state restrictions, like for example, like the Illinois assault weapons ban or something like that, or the Maryland assault weapons ban, or the New York assault weapons ban, it's very difficult under U.S. law for President Trump to actually change those or remove those at the federal level. However, what he can do, again, is the Department of Justice cannot participate in any way in enforcement of those laws, as well as court cases related to those laws. So that is an important thing as they get challenged at the appellate level, at the federal appellate level. But in terms of, can President Trump make AR-15s legal in Illinois, for example? Not right now. However, down the road, with the help of the Attorney General, there's a lot of influence that can be had, but I just want to address that because I know a lot of you guys who live in banned states are going crazy in the comments already. So that is my take anyway, on what he can do for those folks right now. However, again, down the road, it will change a little bit. Another thing that can be tackled very easily is the Form 4473. Again, that is the form you fill out to buy a firearm. And I should note, there's a lot of people watching this video that probably don't remember. There was a time when you didn't have to fill out a 4473 and didn't have to go through a background check. All the way, I believe, across all 50 states, the background check only was put into place in 1998 at the federal level. Some states started doing it in 1993 on their own. However, again, 1998 is not that long ago, and many states in 1997, 1996, you didn't have to do all this nonsense. That was actually part of the Brady Act, which passed in '93. And again, some states started doing it on their own, but at the federal level, you didn't have to do this until 1998. So this is a relatively recent thing. And on the 4473 specifically, there's a few things that under federal law have to be done on the 4473. And they include name, address, sex. However, one thing I went and looked in the code last night. I see nowhere in the federal law that shows you have to make a photocopy of your ID like they do now, and they claim that you have to do. And I say that to say that something that changed under the Biden administration was essentially all the information for you was on the front of the form. When President Biden took office, there was a different 4473 than there is now, is what I'm trying to say. When he took office, on the front page, there was all the information about you. On the back page was the information about the firearm, and then depending on the state you live in, the dealer would make a photocopy of your ID and or concealed carry weapons permit and put that on the back side of the form. I say that to say that President Biden changed it so all that the firearm information as well as your information was all on the front, and many states also had the dealer include a photocopy on the front of the form as well of your ID. And the reason, in my opinion, they did that was to make their database at the ATF easier to search. Additionally, what it allowed them to do was to make it easier to search facial ID. Several folks have made videos on this over the last week or so. I posted about it on all my social media. But the ATF, over the last 4 years, from what we've seen so far, has done over 500 facial ID traces based on firearms. So we're going to get into the database here in just a second. However, again, they shouldn't be doing that. The ATF should not have the ability to facially track gun owners based on a number of different laws as well as just basic civil rights principles. But if you look at the shooting in Pennsylvania to President Trump, they actually, came out in congressional inquiry, the way they identified him was through the ATF's facial recognition software. So I say that to say the 4473 was changed to make it easier for both facial recognition as well as easier to scan into the system and make it searchable under President Biden. Now the Department of Justice and ATF have denied that, but I mean, it's true based on everything we know so far. There are articles on it. I've done videos on it. It absolutely is a traceable database. If it wasn't, then how would they know, like on the day of that shooting in Pennsylvania, how would they know within a few hours who the firearm belonged to? That was leaked by CNN before the actual identification of the shooter's father was made. That was leaked to the media by somebody in the Department of Justice within hours. So how do they know that if their database isn't searchable? Well, the answer is it is searchable, even though they're telling us it isn't. Now, a way to make it harder to make it searchable is just to go back to the 4473 with the minimal information required by law. And again, the things that are required under federal law for that 4473 are name, address, sex. Whether or not the photo ID is, I don't know. I couldn't find it in there, but it's certainly possible that it is. I'm sure the lawyers will let me know down below in the comment section. However, the main takeaway there is the things that are on the 4473, most of them do not need to be there, and they are just there because somebody at the executive level said that they needed to be on that form. Additionally, it should be all the different things in terms of information on the 4473 should be harder to scan into a database. Speaking of the database, there shouldn't be a database. The database should be eliminated. The Department of Justice is prohibited by federal law, both prior to the 1986 Firearms Protection Act, and then the 1986 Firearms Protection Act did a number of bad things, but one of the good things it did that was like compromise in that piece of legislation was it prohibited the Department of Justice as well as the ATF from maintaining any type of firearms database as well as owner database outside of National Firearms Act items. So things like machine guns, suppressors, short barrel shotguns, those things were allowed to be in a database, which they do have. Everyone knows they have an NFA database. It's searchable. You can FOIA it. However, the database that they are scanning these 4473s into is completely illegal. They should not have it. It should be destroyed. Those records should be burned tomorrow, and that absolutely could be done at the executive level, and I see no reason why it isn't. A gun registry is wholly un-American, and anybody who's studied history knows that when gun registries started getting more accurate, more easily searchable, the next thing that comes virtually every time is a gun ban. Look at Canada, look at Australia, look at the United Kingdom as exhibits that prove exactly that point. There is absolutely no reason at all in America why a gun registry exists. Every single one of those documents can just be lit on fire in an eco-friendly way and be gone by this executive order, and I would like to see that happen. When I was making this list last night and this morning, I didn't think this video was going to be that long, but it's going to be a little bit longer. We are almost on a few other things to talk about that could make huge differences in terms of the civil liberties and Second Amendment rights of American citizens. So number one is going to be the definition of items. So this morning on my social media, I shared a crazy opinion that the IRS made back when the ATF relied on the IRS to make opinions. Of course, that has changed since the ATF has been established. The ATF just used to be a tax collection service for many of you guys who may be unfamiliar with that. And then it has morphed into a weaponized law enforcement agency that has really just gotten out of control in many ways. However, I shared on my social media page in 1956, the ATF, well, the IRS at the time, issued an opinion that a wooden rat trap could be considered a destructive device under the National Firearms Act. So they have been making these opinions for a long time. And in fact, if you actually go to the ATF's website, that's where I found it. If you go to the ATF's website, you will see rows and rows and rows and rows and rows of opinions that are not federal law. And I say that to say many of you guys may not understand that there are a number of things that are being enforced as law as it comes to the Second Amendment and as it comes to firearms that are not actually law. They're opinions and determinations made by either the Department of Justice or the ATF. And with the era of Chevron deference becoming a thing, i.e. The Supreme Court has made multiple rulings saying that Chevron deference needs to be reformed. And what that means for people who don't watch legal videos all day long is that the executive agency can't redefine terms. So if it is not in the law, whatever the item is, then it is not law. The ATF or any executive agency for that matter cannot add to the law their opinion on certain items. And so what they have been doing since, again, the 50s, based on my research, is adding their opinions on certain devices that aren't classified as such under law. So a few different examples for them. The easiest one that makes it real simple for people to understand is this gun right here. Again, is classified as a pistol because we have a brace on it. And the ATF has determined that if I was to put a vertical foregrip on here, and vertical is key, the ATF's actual determination says 90 degree. So if I was to put a vertical foregrip on this, then this item would be reclassified as a short barrel rifle. And then if I didn't have the proper form for it, I would be subject to 10 years in prison and a fine of $250,000 for that item, just for putting a vertical grip on there. Whereas if I put an angled grip on there, I would not be. Now, is that anywhere in U.S. law? Absolutely, it is not. It is not in U.S. law. However, it is a determination that has been made by the Department of Justice. Now, one thing that could easily be done is quite literally every determination could be struck from the books because they're invalid and they are not U.S. law. They are opinions based on people and bureaucrats who have been unelected that they have put in place over the last 70 years. So that is sort of the easiest one for most people to understand. Again, a vertical foregrip on a rifle is fine. A vertical foregrip on something like this, which is classified as a pistol under the law, makes it a felony. Why? Because they say it means that you intend to fire it with two hands. Well, even your Glock 17, you intend to fire it with two hands. However, that's not a short barrel rifle. And that just goes to show how insane many of these opinions are. The law is very clear on that. The opinions are not. Another one that comes to play is an item that I'm using it as an illustration to show a larger issue. So in Vietnam, the XM177 rifle was very common. It was a shorter AR-15 or M16 actually variant at the time, and they installed what was called a moderator on the end of it. And there's a couple different reasons that are floated as to why. The most likely one, in my opinion, was to increase back pressure into the system because they shortened the barrel, so there wasn't as much gas coming back, making it slightly less reliable. Some people also said it made it sound like a 20-inch AR-15 or M16, I guess in this case. And the reason they were saying that was because it cut the decibels, i.e. the noise, when fired by roughly 2 to 3 decibels. However, it was not designed as a suppressor. It was just designed to make the rifle more reliable and have a little bit less flash. Well, that was perfectly legal. You could literally order it in a Sears catalog up until the late 1970s, and it was reclassified by the ATF as a suppressor. So nowadays, if you guys see, like I have a video on an XM177 on my channel. The one that I have on there, the muzzle device, is not actually an XM177 muzzle device because that would be an NFA item. I had to use one that just looks like it, but isn't. And that's just an example that because there was literally 2 different ports on the inside of that device versus the one that the ATF says is legal, that is a device that, again, if you don't have the proper documentation for, you can be sent to jail for 10 years. Is that anywhere in U.S. law? No. It is the interpretation of U.S. law by people at the Department of Justice, I believe the IRS at the time, actually, that was a National Firearms Act device. It just goes to show how insane these rulings are. And again, people are paying real prices for this. Like I mentioned, that sailor, he's serving 20 years in prison right now for opinions other people had that ultimately he actually didn't even violate. But go watch those videos if you guys are interested in that. But trust me, the guy didn't violate any laws, but yet here he is, a convicted felon because of these types of opinions. And hopefully President Trump and his team looks into that. Another easy pro-Second Amendment win for President Trump, if he wanted to do so, was to put in place another NFA amnesty period. So again, in 1986, they passed their Firearms Protection Act. There was a ton of stuff in that bill. One of them was a machine gun amnesty period where if you, let's say, served in Vietnam, Korea, World War II, or your family members did, and they brought back machine guns, for example, and you didn't have them registered on the federal registry, you had an amnesty period where you could register them and not have any sort of criminal charges be pressed. That legislature allowed for several different amnesty periods in it. However, only one has ever happened, and it absolutely has already been passed by Congress. It has been signed into law by U.S. President. President Trump could declare another one tomorrow if he wanted to, and have amnesty for all of the NFA items, including machine guns, shotguns, short barrel shotguns, suppressors, etc., that people may have in their possession, maybe were passed down in their family over the years, but weren't registered. They could register them on that list and then preserve those historic items and not have to worry about facing felony charges for that. And the last thing before we close the video out is just to address the day-to-day options of the actual ATF. So many of you guys may know a gentleman named Brian was shot in an early morning raid in Arkansas recently by the ATF as well as local law enforcement. The details of it are a little bit sketchy, but what we know is that he was an airport manager who worked in an area where firearms were not permitted. So law enforcement could have engaged with him in that area and done so in a relatively safe manner because, again, firearms were not permitted in that area. They chose instead to go to his home during the hours of darkness, kick his door in. He allegedly fired at the agents and they fired at him and killed him. And I say that to say all of that is alleged because there's no body cam footage used by the ATF agents who conducted that warrant or raid, depending on how you want to look at it. And I think it's a very easy thing to change how the ATF is armed, if you will, and how they do daily operations. If you are an ATF agent and you are armed and you are going to interact with American citizens, you should have to wear a body camera. I mean, there are small towns in America with populations of 1,000 people where their officers have to wear a body camera. Why don't federal agents have to do so? They should have to do so. It's a simple fix. And with the budget of these agencies, there is absolutely no reason why they can't have body cameras and store the data on those body cameras so that way their actions can be viewed by all Americans, because ultimately they are supposed to be serving us and our rights. And if they're not doing so, then it will be shown on camera. And if they are doing so, then it will be shown on camera. That is a very easy one. Additionally, like I mentioned, the roots of the ATF in terms of Second Amendment law go back to collecting taxes. That was the big role in it. And nowadays it has become militarized and has become a standing army, the type of standing army that our founding fathers warned us against. So all of that stuff could be sold off. I don't really see a reason why you need MRAPs as a tax collection agency. That seems a little crazy. Or any NFA items. Like, why do these agents have NFA items that are restricted by to the citizens, rather, I should say, that they serve? That seems a little weird to me. It seems a little bit like the balance of power between state and citizen has gone awry. But that, I suppose, is a video for another day. Those are my ideas on what President Trump could do with his administration in the early days to show a move back towards restoring the Second Amendment rights of the American citizens. Again, a lot of them are easy. Like I said, those 2021 to 25 ones, those are real easy. Those could happen virtually overnight, within a month or two. They could all be done, and those rights could be restored to the American citizens. Some of the other ones I said also could be done quickly. Some of the other ones would be a little bit more difficult. If I missed something, let us know down below what I missed. I definitely am looking forward to it. I think a lot of you guys are going to have some good ideas, and hopefully some of these ideas will be passed along to President Trump, his team, as well as the new folks leading the Department of Justice. And with that, that's pretty much all I have for you on this topic. If you guys like this video and you're not seeing 2 to 4 videos a week, like I said, I've made videos on detailed portions that we just hit the high level of here today many times in the past. So if you like this video, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. If you've done both of those and you're not seeing 2 to 4 videos a week here on the channel, you're being censored by an algorithm from my content. Easy way around that is to sign up for the email at the website here on your screen. It'll get you put on 2 different lists. One list goes out once a month and it has all the videos since the previous month's email went out. So that way you're not being censored by an algorithm from my content. Additionally, it will get you put on the daily deals email list, and it will go out every day. It has typically 8 of the best deals that we find around the internet. Whatever the item is, if it is ammunition, if it is a firearm, if light, optic, etc. If it's in the email on a given day, it's the cheapest I know of for that item anywhere, because I've done the price comparisons for you. So that way, hopefully it saves you some time and some money, which certainly is important. Additionally, we have an SMS list that you can sign up for at the website here on your screen. That goes out at most once a day, and it either has a really smoking deal or a new video that I just dropped, once again, preventing the algorithmic censorship of my content for you, and it goes straight from me into your text inbox. And I think that's pretty much it. That's all I got for you guys. Again, let me know what I missed down below. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing everybody in the next video.